telling people you need to go and stock up on food because people are going to wake up, and they are waking up. I just put a blog post at foodstoragefeast.com. I think it was something like food shortages are now common knowledge. And that's dangerous because when the masses realize, holy crap, and they flood to those stores, it's kind of game over for people. So you really need to start taking this seriously because, if you don't see it now, I don't know, maybe you'll never see it. So I think this summer, as we get towards the summer, it really gets scary for a lot of people when they realize, hey, this is for real.
Had so much positive feedback last time Keith Snow and myself talked that, we thought it was appropriate to come on now with the Tonga eruption, food prices continuing, inflation not being transitory, a lot of things disappearing out of, let's say, the shelves that we're seeing across supermarkets. And then the Economist magazine now coming out with something called the shortage economy, quote unquote. So where does that leave us with, ability to feed ourselves, our families, and, get through this in a way that we all still have things that we like to eat? You're going to have to be thinking more regional produce during seasons versus having things shipped in. Just our availability for foods is going to, change a little bit. And we talked about this in our last, go around, that things were going to change. And this is before all these changes. So Keith running foodstoragefeast.com. We're going to talk about that today as well. So just different ways that you might be able to delve into food preparations. And it's an art, it's a science, and it takes a little bit of time to, become more comfortable cooking foods and the kind of foods that the combinations go together that you might not have thought of before. We're going to discuss a few of these issues, especially more of these root vegetables that a lot of people see in the markets, but they're not sure what to do with. The way they had done in many times past, above ground crops are going to have more difficulty with the hail, the wind, the freezes, but below ground tuber type crops definitely are going to be the staple. I mean, they're still staples across an enormous amount of the world, from cassava to taro to the potatoes, and it keeps going on down the list there. So Keith, I appreciate you joining me today. I know there's a lot to talk about, so we're just going to play tennis with some ideas, and everybody really, really enjoyed the quality information given last time on getting our families ready and just mentally framing it that the foods you have around you can prepare into healthy, delicious foods that can keep family or community going.
Well, it's good to be with you, David. And I say for sure all the things you just said are important to keep our eyes on and to keep focused on. And I'll go back to what I said in our previous interview, is I've been listening and watching some of your work now for years, and it sounded very legitimate. And, I did do some of my own research as well. And it seems, I want to say slowly but surely, these things are coming true, but it's actually quicker than that. And the pace of which we're starting to see these shortages. Everyone knows about toilet paper shortages during the quote unquote pandemic earlier in 2020. And I know it was probably in the summer of 2020 that we started worrying about crop shortages and price increases. And I've talked to people because I'm in the industry, and I was seeing a lot of things on the producer side, and people just see what it costs in the store, but the increases hit the producers first. So, for instance, I'll just hold this up as an example. It's just sitting on my dining room table. This is a product that I produce. It's a Parmesan cheese substitute, and it's out on Amazon. And having the ability to package that has been extremely difficult because we're not in the position to where we can order, tractor trailer loads of the packaging. So we're buying, cases and cases and cases. Like we'll probably make, 1,800, 2,000 jars of this stuff at a time. But it's become so difficult and so expensive to get the ingredients. And these are on the wholesale market. Now, the one thing that I do is I use ingredients that are just produced in the United States. That helps to alleviate the whole California port situation. But it's becoming so much more expensive. They're raising prices on the producers, that producer price index going up, up, up. And, eventually these things have to get passed off to the consumer. Now, 2022 is going to be the year. We were seeing it in 2021, but it's really starting to increase now. And a lot of these big CEOs have come out and they said, we can't eat it forever. And, how much of this is manufactured? I don't know. But it seems like all these big companies that are raising prices, they all have a fake meat or a plant-based substitute for us to eat. Now, I just held up something that was plant-based, but it's basically nuts and spices. Now, these plant-based foods that they have, like you just heard recently that KFC has a Beyond Chicken thing. If you look at the ingredients, and having worked in the industry and having customers that wanted some of these vegan things, you look at the packaging on there, and there's 60 ingredients in there. And just about all the ones that are monocrops are GMO grown. They're sprayed with pesticides. So it just seems like these big companies, they all have one goal in mind, and that's to kind of make meat usage a luxury and not something that we can all afford. Now, just a little, I'm in southern Utah, and I don't buy a ton of deli meats, but I bought some roast beef recently, $16 a pound. So it's just, the numbers are here, and I think people really need to take their food budget and the entire process of feeding their family, and they need to be more strategic about it, because eventually the costs are going to get to the point where you'll be forced to do it, and you don't want to be, behind the toilet paper shortage. So preparing and using some of the things that we teach over at foodstoragefeast.com and purchasing some reserve food, I think is getting more and more important, literally week to week. I see so many increases in things that we store here at the house, and I constantly keep buying things, and I just remark, well, last time I bought that, it was $1.50 less, and $1.50 is not a lot. But when you look at across the board your expenditures for food, it's going to really hurt a lot of families.
Yeah. Now buy 200 items that have risen $1.50 each. That's where math works. And that's where people understand the math. Yeah. 50-cent rise on a can of soup. Okay. Now go buy a case, and you're buying 12 cans times 50 cents. That's $6 more than it was. And then if you do the math, you're like, wait, how many cans did that used to be? Like, they stole 3 cans from me out of the box, literally. And the farm inputs, what we're looking at with the herbicide shortages is one thing, but the fertilizer shortages are another, a couple different facets there. And at the same time, they're using Roundup to kill off any weeds that would be in competition for those same nutrients in the soil for those crops. Now, since there's not enough, and they're already talking shortages of Roundup, specifically glyphosate, that I'm not a fan of, but I do know it's a 1-to-1 ratio for fertilizer to percentage of yield decline, and approximately the same for the herbicides. That's counting you're spraying in the rows so the weeds don't come up, which we consider food at times too. If you wild forage, those plants coming up in the fields between the rows of corn, for example, many of them are edibles, especially the amaranth varieties, which really like to spread through fields. And you start to do all the math on this, on percentage, how many bushels per acre decline on the weeds, how many acres are going to be taken offline where farmers won't plant. It's just going to be too expensive because they can't get the fertilizer to run their crops. So they'll prevent plant insurance. And it just seems to be this cascade of things adding on top of. And then we come down to the regular, supply chain issues. Now we have Canada and America here. I think it's even on the 23rd saying if your drivers aren't vaxxed, you can't deliver. So they're looking at a 25 to 30% reduction in, truck traffic across the borders, anything rig based, like you're talking 18-wheeler. Everywhere you look, it seems like, and then we got the port blockages, and you just wonder how much of this is truly organic, no pun intended, and then how much of it is manufactured, because I can't believe all these things are happening at the exact same time. And then the caveat was the reduction and shut off of pipelines that supplied natural gas into the ammonia to produce ammonia and different types of anhydrous fertilizers, urea, and these sort of things. That all got cut off at the knees on purpose. Those were mandates to shut the pipelines, to reduce oil production. The hurricane hit that one largest ammonia producing plant in the United States. And it just seems like there's so many things that have been man-made in this catastrophe versus natural. So I don't know where you sit with that, or, is it too woo-woo to think and try to connect these dots? Because that's all I do is do a video about a certain set of circumstances. And I'm like, wait, that directly relates to this one. And whoa, it relates to that one. And if you start drawing them across, you get a full-on web of, wait, these are all interconnected here, all of it. And where does it boil down to? What's the final common denominator? Food pricing, your availability to food, and what governments can do to put you in a corner if you have no access to food.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. And I guess if you want to round it all up into one little snowball, this is the Great Reset in action. You can clearly see what's happening. So they're using this Great Reset. And think of it like this. Just imagine we're all cattle in a field. The other day, I think about this stuff too much because it does raise my blood pressure. But think about us being, happy cattle grazing in a field. It's sunny. There's beautiful grass. We're biting here and there. It's a huge field, 100, 200 acres. But off in the distance, somebody comes up and puts a cattle gate, a panel, 12-foot panel, one. The cow can still move wherever he wants. That's not a problem. Then on the other side, another one goes in. But the cattle are still free. They can walk wherever they want. And slowly but surely, there's a fence built around them. And all of a sudden, that fence just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And this is ultimately what's happening to us as people. And it's only going to be great for them. It's not going to be great for you and I. And you were saying, connecting the dots between all these things. Initially, in 2020, 2019, 2018, we were just talking about as this sun activity gets lower and lower, that the crop growing regions would get smaller and smaller, kind of like the analogy I just did with the cows and the gates. So you start to shave off 2 or 3% of your grow zones, in addition to having jet streams that are completely unreliable, and all these polar vortexes and all this kind of stuff happening. More and more things go wrong with your food growing. And then as you move into 2020, now you've got a health emergency. So these type of things can get out of hand quickly, but they all these dots, just like you very smartly indicated, they're all connected. And what all of them eventually do is limit our availability to food, everything that we need to live. And you can see when last year we were just worried, okay, well, people are not working at the food factories or whatever. They have COVID, so they're out, the production's down. Oh, there'll be a little less chicken. Chicken, having been in the industry, we used to buy 25 pounds of chicken wings, I don't know, for $30. Now it's like $140 to buy the same thing. These have real effects. And again, at first it was just, employee shortages, but now it's supply chain issues. And then all of a sudden we have, like you said, all these crises with energy. And this really, this is a great focus point if people really think. Energy is so tied into everything we do. It's not just whether you drive a Tesla or whether you drive a V8. That's not it. The cost of energy directly relates to the cost of fertilizer, which directly relates to the cost of food for farmers' inputs. And it's getting to the point where it's untenable for many small to mid-sized farmers because, input costs are always a pain in the neck for farmers. And they've all been, again, herded into this system where they're relying on big corporations, Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, whoever it might be, getting their seeds and their sprays and all this type of stuff. Then they're selling it into a system where they don't control the prices. And eventually, the only thing they control is their land. Most of them will have banknotes on them, but the rest of their expenses, their inputs, it's kind of out of their hands. They have no control of it. And as a business owner, and that's what a farmer is, that's a scary prospect. And that's why, with this product here, I've treaded very slowly because I don't have enough capital to, do huge commodity buys and contracts on all the ingredients and packaging. So I'm at the whim of the market. And that's the same thing that farmers have. There was a guy, and I think I saw it on Christian's channel at iceagefarmer.com. there was a big corn grower, and I think, don't quote me on the numbers, but last year's inputs like 86,000. This year's inputs, same acreage, same crops, all that, like over 170,000. Now, that is going to knock out most of the small and mid-sized farmers. They just don't have the capital to do that. And at some point, when you have also a real estate sort of boom, which is all artificial, when you have people running away from blue states into red states, running from cities to avoid riots and crime, which is on the rise, to get out to the country, you see the price of land elevating. It is not going to take much for these farmers to say, wait a minute, I either go bankrupt on inputs or I sell off the farm so they can put in condos. And this is happening everywhere, and you can see it. I'm looking at land in your state right now, and I always look at the satellite view, and oftentimes you'll see this, great 15, 20, 30 acre piece of land. But when you start looking at it on the satellite, right across the street are housing developments. And it's so unnatural, it's artificial just to plop down, plow in a road and put in 150, 200 homes. That's just not what used to happen, but it's going to increase. But as you said, all these dots connect, everything gets more expensive, and ultimately it's the food that gets harder and harder to afford, harder and harder to find. And it's the average people, it's the middle class. And that's what really, if you think about America, what's great about this country. We've always had a strong middle class. Other countries, you have rich and poor. And that's really it. And they like it that way because the rich make the rules, the poor live under the rules. But as you can see, when you have this type of price inflation, the middle class of America is really getting squeezed. And it's sad to see. And the decline of the country is really going fast, but ultimately it comes down to the food, because we have to feed our families. I mean, as a father of 3 children, that's a responsibility I don't take lightly. So, every time I go to the store, David, I come back with what I went to the store for, but other things to put in the pantry, from seed oils, because I know those are going up. And I don't use canola or any of the cheap oils, but it's all olive oil. That's really not, it's a fruit oil, but I buy olive oil. I'll buy condensed milk. I'll buy cans of tuna fish. I'll buy cans of roast beef, canned butter. All that kind of stuff. Every time I go out, I buy ingredients, and they're usually things that store for a good amount of time that can be made into inexpensive meals, because we're not poor people, but it's getting crazy expensive to feed our family in the way that, we're used to. I mean, I bought a ham, and it's about the size of a softball. I bought this ham yesterday, and it was 2 pounds, I think. It's $25 for it. And I bought it because we have some family coming in. But, I was talking to the clerk as I checked out. I said, man, this stuff's getting expensive. She says, everyone coming through the line is commenting on how crazy it is. So I think we're in some trouble. And I think it's very important for people to learn how to limit their expenses. Now, in the back there, you can see my kitchen. And if you think about it, the kitchen is, I think, the heart of the house, and that's where all the food comes in, gets cooked, and go out. That's a big expense. It's a major expense for our family. And people really need to wake up, because just like I remember telling somebody at work, and I don't know, maybe it was February, that this health emergency was coming from China to America, and it was going to affect our business. And they laughed at me, but a couple of weeks later, we were shut down. Also, I told those people, you better go out and get some toilet paper. What are you talking about? I said, yeah, there's hardly any out there. I'm sure they weren't wiping their tail end on leaves, but I'm telling people, you need to go and stock up on food, because people are going to wake up, and they are waking up. I just put a blog post at foodstoragefeast.com. I think it was something like food shortages are now common knowledge. And that's dangerous, because when the masses realize, holy crap, and they flood to those stores, it's kind of game over for people. So you really need to start taking this seriously, because, if you don't see it now, I don't know, maybe you'll never see it.
Yeah, I want to ping back on the olive oil. Now, we use olive oil and avocado oil, flaxseed oil. But the problem was we were in a hurry when we were at Costco, and I was the one who said, let's get the olive oil. We got olive oil, which is 15% virgin oil mixed with other kind of olive oils. That was my mistake for not choosing only virgin olive oil. Now we can our own, and we do our own sun-dried tomatoes, so we need a lot of olive oil for that. So, we're getting different kinds of size jars to fill up with the oil, with the tomatoes, the garlic, the basil, and then let it sit for 6-8 weeks. But there's a huge difference between just quote unquote olive oil and extra virgin olive oil. So as you're going out to purchase that, and I've also found these cubes of lard, they look like, big sticks of butter. And if you're going to do any baking, like yesterday, we made something called drop cake. It was a recipe from 1914. Very different from what you're used to, but cooking in the old style, using the baking soda, the eggs, separating the egg whites and the yolks. It came out really, really thick. So then we put it in a bamboo steamer to give it some fluffiness. And then today, after it's set, putting it in the steamer, it really fluffed up into what you consider more like a sponge cake type thing. But, look in those old recipe books and see what our grandparents or great grandparents had cooked like. Those are the basic staples that you can use to make almost everything. Because I would tell you that book that we had, it must have only had 20 ingredients or something, or 25 ingredients to make everything in the cookbook from 1914. It wasn't like 60 ingredients like you speak of to do one dish, which is going to be, it's going to be difficult to keep that supply chain intact. So, what I'm noticing and also reading more and more about is anything that requires a huge amount of spices to go into the final finished product is disappearing first, because the manufacturers are having a difficult time procuring all of these different ingredients. So one of the things would be those little packs that you have in instant noodles that you rip open and then you add to the soups to be able to flavor it. They're having trouble. They're almost at the end of their backlog of what they had already pre-produced that they had in extra storage to roll out. So, when you're coming, you're going to start to see more and more things that require more ingredients disappearing off the shelves. Cans of stew that have 15, 20, 30 things in them versus like cream of mushroom or something that has like 4 ingredients. Minus all the preservatives. So looking at the landscape, if you can see first where things are going to disappear, those things that have the most amount of ingredients, if that's something you like, need, and always use, target your spending there first. And extra virgin olive oil as well. You're looking at different periphery countries now as suppliers. It was Italy, it was Greece, Spain, but now you're getting something out of like Tunisia. Like, where did that come from? What do you mean this Algerian extra virgin olive oil? How did that appear suddenly? Like, where are they getting their sourcing from? Did they run out of something? And I was making a joke in one of the videos, being serious at it, knowing that buyers and supply chain managers are going to be moving to different countries of origin. And I said, if you see something coming from Eritrea and that pops up on your store shelf, they are at the end and their backs are against the wall to get anything they can to buy anything to put it on the shelf. So when you're thinking about tiers of need for your stocks, what are the things that have the most ingredients, I would say? And maybe that would ring some bells, but please be careful with the olive oil, because I can definitely taste the huge difference in cooking quality, smoking temperature, and just, it feels oily. It doesn't feel like olive oil that we're used to. It feels like something else has been mixed into it other than, it says 15% extra virgin olive oil, but what's the other 85% of oil that's in there? They say olive oil, but you and I know exactly what that means. They could be any kind of scrubby olive oil that was squeezed out and added in there to make it look good. I don't know. There's a lot of things to think about, and freezing butters, freezing lard, freezing different oils. Oh, the duck fat and the goose fat. If you didn't have a chance to pick it up around Christmas, sorry, you got to wait until next year. Those kind of fats only come around the holiday seasons. And a lot of spices you can only find holiday season times too. Cardamom, yeah, you could go find it if you're really looking in like Whole Foods or something. Oh, by the way, which is New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, those store shelves are stripped bare. And you know what's left on the store shelves there in those states in the Whole Foods? The most expensive things. You were talking about the ham. Did a video yesterday. The only things that are left are the most outrageous, super 5-star, incredible high price things. Everybody else left that. So you can see exactly what's the highest price. That was what left on the shelf. But if you don't have a choice and there's a run in the stores, that's only what you're going to have is what you got in front of you. So do a little bit of early shopping. I don't know. So Keith, let me ask you, when do you think the awakening of most people will come? I am absolutely unequivocally saying a couple of things on a timeline for 2022. The COVID restrictions are lifting across the world in many, many places. Suddenly, it's like a tidal wave of lifting of restrictions. So that maybe you'll give everybody that breath, like you can't keep everybody in panic for so long. Pendulum over into the food scarcity from the fertilizer and then the pesticides, herbicides. But then I think the trump card is going to be the Tonga thing. Once they realize that global temperatures are going to drop approximately 1 degree Celsius, Southern Hemisphere maturation food crops right now aren't going to be as plentiful as they had counted from the forecasts. And then I think the spiral's coming this year. So what do you think the awakening time is going to be? And then how will people react to it?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think it's by this summer coming up. So we're, towards the end of January. So another 5 months or so. And I think everybody's going to be awake. They're going to realize, holy crap, this is happening. And at that point, they're going to flood the stores. They're going to rush the shelves. And that's going to be a scary thing, because those type of panics, if you have a shortage and it creates a panic, you have a bigger shortage. And these things will really feed off each other. And that's scary. I mean, you don't want to be, on Food Storage Feast, we had this picture, and I think it was Walmart. And this was from, I don't know what year, it was a couple years ago, right before an ice storm or something. And the quote under the picture was like, you don't want to be fighting the zombies in Walmart for the last loaf of bread. And that's what it looked like. There was no bread. I mean, I don't go to Walmart often. I despise the place. But I went in there the other day to get something very specific, protein powder. And I just walked some of the shelves, and man, it was scarce, particularly in the perishable foods are very scarce. So I think this summer, as we get towards the summer, it really gets scary for a lot of people when they realize, hey, this is for real. For the beans, more of a Thai style rice, but it has, some cilantro, if you can find a cilantro, some green onions. So I add some fresh food to the stored food or the long-term storable food, and I make meals out of it. And those are the type of things that really keep people happy, keep them full. And, you mentioned something about freezing things. We purchased a freezer, sadly, and I don't know, maybe bigger is better, but I was with my wife and we were looking at it, and it was another $200 to go from like 18 cubic feet to 20 cubic feet, or 17 to 20. And she said, oh, that's going to be plenty big. I mean, we filled that damn thing up in weeks. It is like stuffed to the gills. So we're probably going to wind up getting another one, because I want to have, stored fat, stored protein. These are the things that'll be hard to find. I mean, and we already have a lot of canned foods, canned vegetables. Now, are canned vegetables wonderful to eat? They're not, but they are edible. And if it ever came down to it, you don't want your family looking at you and say, why the hell didn't you buy the canned vegetable? Because I would have eaten it. So we do store a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of canned meats. We tend to eat more of a lower carb style diet, for the most part. We do have our carb days. Like the other day, I made fried rice, and I had some beef that we cooked the day before. And I purposely took out a really big piece of beef. We cooked it, and I left, I don't know, maybe a pound of it, because I knew I'd do a stir fry. Every time I make rice, instead of making 1 cup of rice, I do 3 or 4. And then there's always a pretty full rice cooker left. I tuck that in their fridge, and then I just plan accordingly. Now that's a day. And these are things that people need to think about. That's a day when we can sit at the table and have steak fried rice, which is amazing. It has all those ingredients that I talked about, the soy sauce, hoisin, garlic, onions, all this kind of stuff, but a very little bit of meat. I mean, maybe a pound of meat was $4 because it wasn't an expensive cut. We add a few local eggs to it, the rice, which is cheap, a couple of fresh ingredients, and you have a really delicious, it's like going to a restaurant and having fried rice. This was, Thai style steak fried rice. And these are the type of things that we need to start focusing on, because life is getting expensive everywhere. I mean, an oil change from my car is, it takes synthetic. It's upwards of $80. Now, could I do it myself? Yes. But I think the food is an easy way. Like I've always told people, I can save you $300 a month like that, right in your kitchen, just by using some of these principles. And that was definitely when I created Food Storage Feast and all the recipes. I noticed that our grocery bill really dropped because we're combining some fresh foods with the easily storable things. And that's just a great strategy, I think, for number one, having a lot of variety in your diet. But number two, I think the most important thing is you don't want to wait until you need to be cooking. Because what do most people do? They go to the store at 6 o'clock at night and what's for dinner? I don't know. And they run to the store, they get something and they throw it together. That, they're in a rush. They pay top dollar for whatever. They throw it in the cart, or they order food in. They do Grubhub. All these things very expensive. We haven't been out to eat as a family in a long time. The other day, I didn't feel like cooking. We wanted Thai food, incidentally, so I took our family of 5 out for Thai food. With the tip, it was just over $100. That's a lot of money. That's why we only do it very, very so often. So with that $100,
can I ask, Keith, let me ask you a question then.
Please.
What was the quality of the food in the restaurant compared to what you have made at home? Were you, satisfied with the food that was coming out from behind the kitchen there, or was it just mediocre and you could see sizes of plates were smaller, portions were smaller, quality of the meat or the food was same, different? I don't know. I'm just asking some questions about, did you eat there prior, and then what are you getting this time?
Yeah, well, we have eaten there prior, and for Thai food, it's one of the better ones around here. I am a professional chef and I have, 4 decades or so of cooking under my belt. But yeah, I could definitely see some issues. Another thing, that a lot of people don't take into consideration, but I do, is the texture of food. So this particular curry that I got, it was a chicken curry, and it had, 6 or 8 pieces of chicken breast. What it did have, and to your point, is it had a lot of liquid. So it wasn't a curry that had any body. It was rather soupy, and they served me with a fork. It's very hard to eat. But the cheap things like onions, there was a crap load of onions in there, and they didn't take any thought to the texture. So they were huge, like long pieces of onions. It's very difficult to eat that. If they were diced up or minced up, it would have been a lot more easy to enjoy. But yeah, we went out. I didn't have to cook. I think that was the biggest benefit there. And we did have some leftovers. The spices were pretty good, but overall you can do better at home if you try and train. So yeah, but I am seeing, again, just some of the corners being squeezed in there, a little less chicken, a little less coconut milk and more water in the curry.
I totally understand what you're saying, especially with stews. Like when it comes out more soupy than thick, if you order a hearty stew somewhere, you want that thing thick, sticking to your ribs kind. You don't want a whole bunch of water dripping down. Oh, I spilled it on my shirt. It dribbled off. Like what? Okay. A dollop of some sort of stew dropping on your shirt is way different than liquid dripping in there. You're right. There's a huge difference in the thickness and the consistency. You think they could have put a little cornstarch or something just to thicken it up, to fake you out a bit, right? But they still didn't even take that next step to go for some thickening agent inside there. Now, speaking of thickening agents, cornstarch, tapioca, what else would you use for a thickening agent if you're going to bring something up to that consistency of a thicker, heartier dish?
Of course, a roux is a very popular thing,
yeah.
And that's basically fat and flour. Now, for me, I try to avoid gluten, at all costs. It really just doesn't agree. It doesn't give me stomach problems. I don't have any, intestinal issues with it, but it affects my skin. So I will use things like cornstarch, a slurry of cornstarch. Sometimes a little bit of xanthan gum is what could be good, but you can overdo that and have slimy food. So you have to be careful. But A boiled potato can be put into a stew. You can mash up a boiled potato and put that in there. Also, potato flakes are excellent thickeners. They hardly bring any flavor, and they'll change the texture of something like that significantly. Now, one thing people need to think about, long term. So I made stew, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, and it was chuck meat. So chuck meat is tough. You have to cook it for a long time. It had, gravy, potatoes, carrots, rutabaga, which I love to put in there, butternut squash, some peas, vegetables, whatever. And it was nice and thick. I did tighten that up with a cornstarch slurry at the end. And it was a rather thick and, like you said, a stick to your ribs type stew. But the next day, when you have a little container and there's maybe, I don't know, 3 cups of leftovers, what do you do with that? So for me, again, with the mindset of stretching meals, I'll make what I call pot roast soup. And I think I first had a pot roast soup, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago at the Cracker Barrel. And being from where you are, I know you know all about the Cracker Barrel, but it's a pretty great way to stretch out an old stew. So what I'll do is I'll go in there and I'll physically take out the chunks of beef, and then I'll shred those with my fingers. All the gravy, any of the potatoes, all that will go in there. But what I do is I'll just take out some other vegetables like carrots, celery, onions, the mirepoix, and I'll saute those in a little bit of butter, maybe a drop of olive oil or even lard or beef fat. And then I add the rest of the ingredients in there, and I'll add some canned green beans or maybe some frozen peas, things like that. Can of tomatoes, diced tomatoes with the juice will go in there. And I also keep stock cubes on hand that I buy. Now I've got a secret source of cubes that are from Britain. They're called OXO. And these are probably, in my opinion, they're the best beef cubes compared to the ones in America, which are trash. But because they actually have beef in them, our FDA won't allow them to be brought into the country anymore. Now, my father-in-law is English. My mother-in-law, who's passed, she was German. So they traveled to Europe a lot, and they would always bring home boxes and boxes of this OXO. And it's great to add to a soup like I'm talking about, but it's hard to get. So I do keep some of those cubes. Another brand is Rapunzel. You can get those on Amazon. Some of those higher quality stock cubes, I'll keep some of those. And are they 100% natural? No, but a lot of times you don't have 24 hours to roll, a proper beef stock and then reduce it and wind up with a demi-glace. So a stock cube, some frozen vegetables and some fresh vegetables and some leftovers can make a giant pot of what I call pot roast soup. And that's a meal for us because when you eat that, it has beef, it has potatoes, it has carrots, onions, peas, vegetables, quite a bit of fat in it. It's very satisfying. And again, rather than just, what do people do with leftovers if there's not a full meal of them? I don't know. Give them to the dog. Who knows what they do? But you can take leftovers, just like I described with the, having a little leftover beef or chicken and then turning it into a stir fry. All these types of meals, when they get up into your brain, I call it your culinary inventory. And usually people only have a few things that they make. But, take out a pen and paper. And I don't think a lot of people spend enough time thinking. So take out a pen and paper and figure out what you like to eat. And, if you're the meat and potatoes type, maybe it's grilled chicken and I don't know what you eat with it. Maybe it's steak and potato. Maybe it's a pork loin and something. If you regularly like those kind of foods, write it down on a paper and see how it goes from the first meal to initial meals. And this is what we do either well or not well in the restaurant industry. And this is often what keeps restaurants from failing or not. And a lot of times if you and I manage chefs. I mean, that's kind of what my later career has been, is managing chefs. And you have 2 types of chefs, those that understand business and the type of things that I'm describing now, and others that are just fantastic cooks. And you can always tell when you go into the restaurant. I can look at a menu and I can tell roughly where their food percentage is and how successful they are by how wisely they're planning their menus out. So you want to plan for, and good chefs we'll plan, okay, we have this on the menu. We're going to wind up with what left over? Well, you're going to have some of this left over. Okay, what do we do with that ingredient? Well, you can mix it with this and make that. That's the way we need to think at home, like restaurant owners. A good restaurant owner doesn't design a menu where the leftovers have to be thrown out. They also don't design a menu where the leftovers make crappy food. They make those leftovers into something special. Like for this, you don't think Cracker Barrel is making just big batches of pot roast soup. No, they only usually have it, once a week if they have it, and they're taking scraps and cuts and making it into a good menu item. And that's the way we need to really think at home. And I try to do that a lot, and I try to feature that kind of information in the Food Storage Feast, just to help people save money. Because saving money, if it's not on your radar now, man, you're going to be in deep crap come next summer.
Are people ready for it though? And again, it's all about changing the mind frame, because we've grown accustomed to having everything we've always wanted for our entire lives, pretty much. I mean, if you like my age and my parents, they were born after World War II. So everything up to this point, I mean, sure, if you were in different parts of the world, if you were living in Vietnam during the 60s, that wouldn't have been a pleasant place. If you were in Korea in the 1950s, those wars going on there. But in terms of having it here in America, that kind of turmoil, no, never happened. So everybody with the stability of having stocks or shelves stocked continuously with rarely a break, except maybe the 1970s, people had to wait in line for gas during the oil embargo. But aside from that, you really just didn't see anything really roll off into what we're seeing now. It's the first time since the 1940s that anything like this would happen. But knowing that Victory Gardens were there and a lot of people took care of themselves when things got really, really tight in World War II. I saw some of these old photos, even in downtown New York City, what you would consider those areas where there's grass now and trees in the center between the streets or in the neighborhoods between the blocks. Any disused piece of land was turned into a garden. And you look at some of these, they rolled down the street 30, 40 blocks being farmed by the people who were living there. And to some of these older photos, you got the Empire State Building, but all you have is gardens going back from that as far as you can see, because everybody chipped into that effort. Now, where we sit today, everybody's divided, not say everybody, but an enormous amount of people are. And as you mentioned before, 30-acre piece of land, and across the street, you got 150-unit apartment complex. I'm looking for more, and I've found a place where it's more homogenized, where my 20 plus acres is next to another guy who has 15, and the next person has 5, and those people over there have 25, and it rolls at an even smoothness out through the farming community here. Close to an Amish farm, great. Getting some sheep or lamb, I should say, and then we got a 400-pound calf coming here in a few days, hopefully, fingers crossed on that. But how do you get people to move together? Do you think they will? That's the whole thing. I can go buy live meat from the Amish and pay by the pound live weight, have them slaughter it, and we'll butcher it ourselves. That all day long can do that as long as there's a supply for them. But see, the animal husbandry, they're doing it themselves on their own farms. So the sheep and the lambs that are provided there, hey, those are from their own flocks that they have out amongst these 3 different Amish farms within the 50-mile radius here. We could sit back all day long and do that. But in other places in the country, it's not going to be like that at all. So do you think people can come together? Or do you think it's going to fall apart and just the fabric's going to rip? Because it's going to be the mind frame of cooperation, but we are nowhere, anywhere remotely, shape, or form from that. And the school system, at least since the 1990s, has been teaching individuality, no community, you first, you second, you third, and everybody else last, and step over and claw over whoever you can to get what you need to get. And that's okay. It's America. Greed is good. But where does this set us up for this string shredding society thing that we're into?
And again, going back to your point about connecting dots, nothing happens fast. Everything takes a little bit of time. Remember the analogy of the cows in the field. We're completely free, but no, there's fences, all this stuff coming around us. Think about social media and screens. People, and it's not by accident, they don't design apps for people to check them once a day. So to your point about us being divided, not only are people divided on many different levels, but they're also occupied. And when they're occupied, things happen around them that they don't realize. Anything they tell you that's temporary is permanent, like you mentioned earlier. So people don't understand what's going on around them. We are in a collapse right now. It's getting worse. And the edges, the fringes of society are being snipped. You're being boxed into a corner slowly but surely. Now, what about the cooperation? And this is something that's important. And, my whole theory on, food storage, my whole theory on farming, all these kind of things, we have, and everybody should have, pantries with food, all different types of food. But then you also, so that's your storage or your savings. So like we have a long-term pantry, and then we have a everyday pantry, and these things have lots and lots of food in them. So that's our savings, right? But then we also are acquiring food now, and this goes to a little bit of the cooperation that you're talking about. Now I get some local chicken and beef, not a lot. It's here in Utah where I'm at. It's not very good, but we do get some of it. And we have chicken and duck people that get us eggs, although as you get into the winter, the supply is sketchy. So we have those sources of food. We go to the supermarket like everybody else. We order things online to bring. So it's a two-pronged approach. You have your storage of food, you have an income or a continuation of things coming in. Now, to your point, I think what's very important is to put down the screens, to get off the social media, and to start understanding that we are living through this collapse now. This is why this type of information is important to understand, but you have to act on it. I mean, watching David's videos or, going to Food Storage Feast to look at, we have over 50 videos there. But if you don't use the information, you're not making changes. And people tend to, again, the social media is the great procrastinating tool of all time, because people, the most important thing that you have are your thoughts and your attention. That is solely yours. So my thoughts and what I put my attention on, I mean, it says it in the Bible, where your heart is, that's where your actions are. What does that person really love? And, it's usually what you spend your money on. So your thoughts, your attention, these are really important things. And you have to start putting thought to developing community, to meeting farmers, to finding sources like you're talking about. Because you get out of the cities and you get to some places where stuff grows, there's a lot of opportunities from meeting, and you have to treat these people well. So these egg people, I don't nickel and dime them. I don't complain about the price. I mean, sometimes I'll pay $4 and $5, $8 a dozen for duck eggs. But when I see those people, I show up on time. I have cash money. I give them, right now, the next time I see my egg guy, he's going to get like 15 cartons, recycled cartons for him to use. So that helps him out. So this is what you need to do, is make it easy on them, but develop these relationships. And I've always done this from having people that would let me in North Carolina where it was illegal. I used to go to dairy farms and go right to the bulk tank and take that beautiful, milk and cream out. Whether it's developing legal sources. When we spoke the other day, I told you there's a place where you can buy raw milk there in the great state of Tennessee. But there's people doing things like this all over. And it's important to focus your attention on that. Not solely, you've got a life to lead, but a little bit. You have to make decisions and take actions to start helping secure your future. Now, the other thing that's going on that people just don't realize, and here in Utah, if you don't realize it here, you'll never realize it, because we live a few hundred miles from the biggest failed state in history. And those people are leaving that state in droves. So number one, I see the real estate prices skyrocketing. I see the license plates on their cars constantly. But I also see the crime. We recently had a Greyhound bus establish a direct route, which we never had, from southern Utah to Los Angeles. All of a sudden, the homeless here are starting to show up everywhere. So you have homeless, you have people's catalytic converters being robbed. So we are living through a great realignment right now. And people just think of it solely on, before it was the riots of 2020. Oh, we've got to get the hell out of the blue cities and move to the country. But then as we got further into 2020 and into 2021, it was the health emergency that started to drive people. And this, again, people have to understand their history, because if you understand history, you know what's going to happen in the future, because nothing is really new. Look what happened to the Soviet Union. I mean, it was the great superpower aside from the United States, but before it collapsed in 91, I believe it was, 92, some of their countries that are now independent countries, they started breaking away. Azerbaijan, for instance, they left before. So they formed their own country. And you're seeing this right now in the United States. That's why people are moving strategically. Now, if you don't realize that's happening, you're blind. But that's what's happening. We're going through a realignment here, because people are smart, and the vast majority of people get it. They understand that this whole thing we've been living through is bullshit, and it's being used to control us. And they're not going to stop the tyranny. And I mean, at some point you're going to go to the grocery store. It'll never happen here. Yeah, it will. It's happened in every other country. You'll go to the grocery store and they're going to want to check certain things before you can get into grocery stores. So you have to do just what David said. Find that Amish farmer. Offer to help that Amish farmer. Donate your time, your labor. Think about trading. I trade lots of things. And bartering is a great way to do things, to acquire the things you need. But the sources of all different types of things need to be kind of sourced outside of the system. So for food, obviously, the supermarket system, because if you're buying 100% of your stuff there, you are controlled. They own you, and you can't get away from it. So trying to diversify and limit what you buy, get some things locally, buy from a local farmer, go to a farmer's market. It's cold now, but in a couple months, in most places, farmers markets will happen. Grow your own
could I stop you? Hold on a second. I'm going to throw something nasty into the cogs here. In states like California, New York, and the other ones that already have a little bit more, let's say, strictness into what people's movements are, they're going to require the sellers that are in the farmers market to have the vaccine passport. The sellers, the actual organic farmers that are coming in, are going to be required to show proof of vaccination before they can even register to get their stand out on a Saturday. And then the people that are attending or want to visit the venue to come in to get the organic produce are also going to have to show proof of vaccination to even enter into be able to purchase that produce. So then what does that leave you if you think your secondary source, I'm just going to go to the farmers markets? Yeah, in some places, but other places they're already taking that off the table. So what's going to evolve out of that? Are there going to be, the far point of sale where that farmer says, you come out to my land, but I don't want people running around here. So is there going to be some kind of black market off, non-registered, non-permit kind of trading space that opens up, and you can only get it on the ham radio at a certain time? They'll tell you where the next one is. And it's open for 30 minutes before the police come because we don't have permits. That's where it's gone already. Not going to, gone. So farmers markets opening in the spring in many states are not going to be available unless you can show proof, and then the sellers show proof. So where does that leave us? Okay, you just took 10% of all the farmers markets offline here in the States. What's next?
Go and buy something. And yeah, do you do Venmo? Sure, you send somebody a Venmo payment. Now this year, those people are going to start reporting that. All that stuff is going to be reported. So it's harder and harder to use the online tools. And like you mentioned, farmers market. Okay, all of a sudden, if you bring up, and we had things called tailgate markets, and it was just trucks that would pull up, they'd back up their pickup truck, and they'd have, corn or honey or tomatoes, and they had a table, and you bought it from them. Eventually, those people are going to have a business license to transact, and then, from there, eventually the dollar will go away. And I think it's all headed there, and it's scary to think about. But this is what's happening around us. And this is why, you know, we need to start paying attention to what is really important.
But the way that it's being set up right now, digital currencies, and that's the way the Fed coin on the digital space, this programmable money, will be out next year too in 2023. So it seems like they're getting everybody ID.me to get ready for the unveiling of the Fed coin, which is a central bank digital currency, which pings right back to where you said cash is going to go away. So every dollar will know where it's going to be spent. Now, your access to these digital dollars are going to be required for this ID.me facial recognition thing. And then in addition, what else? Because you know it's not going to stop there. Because if they have all the money, then they really control you. If you have no ability to grow your own food or buy it in a supermarket because you're not on the system, then what? Then what, really?
Yeah, well, again, I think a lot of people always say, oh, we're America. This could never happen here.
What is happening?
Yeah, do a little research into China's social credit score and see how tightly they control everything there. It's very tightly controlled. Oh, it'll never happen here. It is happening here. And all those little things like you just described are going to get more and more. But what I hope and what I see as a potential, again, the great realignment that's happening in the country, people are moving to freer states. At some point, they're just going to, you know, the politics in this country are a complete and utter joke. So the left, the right, they're all, you know, it's all theater. So at some point, I think the states, again, going back to my description of some of the Russian states, some of those breakaway states, I do believe that will happen here and that new countries will be formed inside this country. And I believe it's this oppression and tyranny that they're really, the screws being tightened to where you can't buy something without showing proof of this or that. The more they do that, the more alignment is going to happen and people are going to be moving to freer states. And eventually, I do believe that the country that we know might wind up being individual countries, and those great big powers that exert all these forces won't be able to do it anymore. I mean, you just take property tax for an example. I mean, that was never something that I don't even think that's in the Constitution as possible. But lots of things aren't in the Constitution, but you have regulations, laws. I mean, just go and try and buy a personal protection item in Massachusetts, for instance, or, you know, to carry one. I mean, the hoops you would have to jump through are crazy. So I do think at some point this country will sadly break into pieces, and a lot of the overlords would be tossed to the side. Now, that's an ugly process. But I do think if this keeps up the way it's heading, that's a possibility. It's a very dark thought, but yeah.
Yeah, Texas had been floating the idea as well. And, you know, if you look at the balkanization of those countries post-Russia, what we understand, Soviet Union, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, which broke into Slovenia, and Czech Republic. I mean, just go down that whole line there, and then you get over to Georgia and Armenia, Azerbaijan area. Those are all independents now, but they still rely on the great power because they didn't have anything that set them aside as a producer of energies. Well, I mean, if you're in the Caspian Sea basin there with Azerbaijan, of course, but to refine that into the fertilizers, to bring in the machinery for farming and that sort of thing, that all came from another, what you consider superpower that had this massive manufacturing. I mean, inside Lithuania or Latvia, how many factories making massive farm machinery and generators and transformers do you think there are in Latvia? There aren't. They rely so heavily on imports from so many other things just to keep their dailies going, imports of food. They don't grow enough to even feed their entire population. And think about these things that we can't grow, but we need to manufacture. Steel smelting, steel, cold rolled steel, carbon fiber. That's not coming from Latvia. That's coming from somewhere else, United States, China, Russia. You know, you got to get into these heavier kind of industrialized nations to give the world the things they need to continue forward with civilization. Yeah, growing indoors is great, but you can only grow lettuces. I don't see anybody putting a wheat field in their front room with LED lights. That's just not realistic. So moving forward, a few of these challenges of being able to grow food outdoors, sure, but we lost all the blooms off our trees for the fruit this year. It froze super late, all the way in late April when everything had budded out already and it had bloomed out. So where does that take us? Can we protect ourselves? Yeah, we're going to be super reliant on a lot of other things. So breaking down, if the state's balkanized, it would probably be the Southeast US. There's ports, there's manufacturing. Look at all the automobile manufacturing here. There's steel smelt. There's all kind of aluminum fabrication, aluminum smelting. There's a huge amount of stuff in the Southeast US, Texas as well. They could supply the energy, but then when you get up into, the flyover states, if you will, the Corn Belt and that sort of thing out in Kansas, they got food. So what is it going to be? The whole Midwest grow belt becomes its own area, but they're the major food producer. Southeast US has the ports, food. Texas has energy. And then desert states, what's going to happen with them? If it's going to balkanize out, going to be, it'll be a tumultuous process. But I think if we look at the FEMA maps, I think zones 1 through 7, 1 through 9, those might be a good indication of somebody's already mapped this out. That's why they set the FEMA zones as such. Just saying.
Oftentimes I wish I didn't know what I know, and I'm sure you're feeling the same, that you don't wish you knew the things that you knew sometimes, because if you're looking at your screen, it's a perfect little world on TikTok and Instagram, of course, but the reality is it's definitely, things are changing. And those are very good points about, is a place sustainable? Now I would say, Iowa, for instance, how many acres of the soy and corn there is grown using regenerative principles? Probably less than 2%.
Oh, way less, probably 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, so they're all completely relying on the inputs. Those are all big, giant global companies. So those people don't have much, it all has to work well for it to work well. And when it starts to not work well, it's scary. And these are dark topics. And again, that's why who knows what's going to happen. But I do know people need to try and build as much security into their life as they can. There's ways to do it. We've touched on quite a few of them, but also, certain places are better places than others. Like big cities are not great places to be. And I think, as more and more people realize that, a lot more people are going to move out into the country. I mean, I just did an audio show. I talked about, there were 2 topics. Is this the end of chemical agriculture? Seeing how much, and I can't remember the number, but it's a great number, the amount of phosphate that we have to import from China. And they stopped all their phosphate exports, I think last October, something around there. We're not independent with phosphate. So, there's a couple of states, Florida being the number 1, where the phosphate comes to make the fertilizer to keep Iowa running. So Iowa, I mean, they're, places like that, they definitely don't have much security if this keeps going. And smarter governments are, and you've been talking about this, they've been stopping exports. The smart countries don't export their food when we're in the middle of a crisis, or the ones that are really looking out for the people don't. I don't think for a minute that the people that run our country don't understand that these things are happening, but they see it as a tool. But with that much dependence on fertilizer, it's a tough place to be. And I think, one answer to the chemical thing and chemical agriculture thing is regenerative practices. Now that it takes a couple of years to do it, but the soil is everything. And if you don't have healthy soil, I mean, throughout millennia, the societies that degraded their soils don't exist. And we're seeing that right now, where think about this great experiment of chemical agriculture started, let's say around the 50s. NPK, what a wonderful thing. And then you went from NPK and row crops into genetically modified, and the people were promised a world. The yields are so much higher, the inputs are less, but you got the opposite. And in addition to getting the opposite, you also became completely reliant on government subsidies and seeds and chemicals that come from a few different companies. So you got the opposite. It's just like the Affordable Care Act. Whatever they name something, just assume it's the opposite. It wasn't affordable. Just like the Patriot Act wasn't very patriotic. These things all tied together. But regenerative agriculture is something that I'm very excited about. I think it offers a lot of promise. And if you can, graze animals and move them often on land, and then, keep things growing in the soil at all times, don't till the soil, eliminate the use of pesticides and all that. Yeah, if you're a big farm that's doing row crops in the way I described earlier, yeah, you're going to have a suffering point. But the farms that have realized, and a lot more will realize it this year, it's just untenable to pay these type of input costs. So they're going to be forced to either say screw it and sell it to a real estate developer, or to adopt other practices. And there are a lot of people out there promoting regenerative ag and permaculture, and these things can offer, we talked about a lot of things on here that if everyone is watching this entire interview, they may want to throw their hands up and say, oh crap, it's grim, but there are things happening, and regenerative ag is one of them. And don't think for a moment that those big ag companies don't understand that that's happening. Now, a lot of times, just like, banks will, or governments will, want to have a war, but they sell the war equipment at the same time. They usually are straddling both sides of the fence. So these chemical and giant food companies, they're selling the chemicals, they're selling the GMO seeds, they're doing all that, but they're also investing hundreds of millions of dollars into regenerative agriculture. So if you farm your land regeneratively, there's bonuses, things that you can get, and they know it's really the new organic. So in 10 years, and I'm starting to see it show up on labels, regenerative ag. Just like 10 years ago, I told my wife, you'll start to see A2 genetics start to appear in dairy. And sure enough, there's A2 milk on the shelves now. And this type of thing is growing. And these big companies, they're invested in it because they know it's the next big wave. They're not stupid. They know you can only dump billions of pounds of glyphosate, have GMO seeds where you eliminate diversity. They know you can only do it for a few decades before the soil is completely degraded and the stuff hits the fan. So people are looking to regenerative ag, and there's people that I follow on the internet. It's amazing the results when you transfer from a row crop input intensive farm to a no drill operation and you incorporate regenerative principles. You can build soil. You can build soil life, soil diversity. And if you have healthy soil and you have animals on that soil, you have wealth because those animals reproduce. Every time a cow has a heifer calf or a bull calf, you've just made money, and you already own the other one. So it builds. It's like compounding interest. And those type of things, any kind of animal, sheep, goats, like you mentioned earlier, when those are running on a system that is improving soil, those animals are being intensively managed, not just thrown out on a field and letting them wreck the field and then having to throw hay over the fence, but by moving them and letting them build soil with the hoof action, with the nibbling action, with their manure, and moving them off, just like Joel Salatin and these.
Joel Salatin, great example. I'm going to go to try to visit him. He's about 3 hours from here at Polyface Farms.
Yeah, this is the future. And ultimately, you and I have talked. I've been over to your state and I look every day at land. That's what I would like to do in the not too distant future, is to be on a piece of property. I'd like to graze cattle and have chickens and ducks and things like that, and be healing a piece of property and making that thing have excellent soil and therefore producing excellent quality products, because as things happen the way we described earlier, those people are going to be looking for people that are doing the things like I just described. Do you think somebody that has a regenerative farm like Brown's Ranch in North Dakota, do you think they have any trouble selling their beef, eggs, or pork or chicken? No, they have regular customers. And to answer your question about, farm markets being stopped and all that, they go and they have drops. So people will meet the truck and they'll buy those, and they order it ahead of time. They pay ahead of time. again, part of that is in the system, whatever finance and applications that are online to take the payments. But the bigger point is that the farmer is bringing the goods right from the healthy soil, and they have drops, and people are getting the foods they need. And that's where I see the future. That's what I think will happen. And that's a future I want to be a part of.
Yeah, and we'll have to protect that too. Now, let me add into compost here. I have a personal story. So I ended up connecting with Monterey Mushroom, and I have a driver with he has a pretty good sized dump truck, comes in, he can carry 20 cubic yards max fill. So ended up getting 60 cubic yards of mushroom compost. But at the same time, I was interested in getting a few other types of compost to mix it up to have a real natural fertilized compost. So chicken manure and cow manures mixed in with that. But the driver who I use has also been looking for some of this stuff because he has a farm as well. It's nigh impossible. The only reason I was able to get the compost is because I have a registered farm. And Monterey Mushroom, wherever it is, they have facilities everywhere in all 50 states, lots of them around. They only deal with registered farms that are taking 10 cubic yards or more. They will not facilitate a small trailer, some sort of pickup truck coming in. No, you bring in a rig and you pick it up, and that's all they want to deliver with. And so it's coming down to getting horse manure mixed with hay. And one time per month, maybe a load of 6 or 5 cubic yards of chicken dung. That's it. That's all that's left. And the amazing point about this is I was asking, driver that helps me, can we get more next month in February? Can we get like one, a couple deliveries per month through the season? Because we're going to use that to, compost all the 100 and some fruit trees, to set up a whole new garden area, thicken the soils and do all this. He's like, no. After January at the end here, the 31st, everything's been forward bought by a single buyer for all mushroom compost coming out of the several Monterey mushroom facilities here in East Tennessee. All of it's been forward bought. There's not a single kilogram available for anybody from the public because it's all been bought. Now, who has that kind of money to rock in and say, we're going to take 500,000 tons of compost from the mushroom logs out of these 5 facilities for the rest of the year? Who's got that kind of money to plunk that down and get the guaranteed delivery? Who's got that kind of transport that can come in with their either dump trucks or trailers to come in and completely clean that place out day after day, after month, after month, after month? That is a massive buyer. You're talking about millions, 500,000 tons of compost coming out. Where do you put that? Somebody's getting ready to start fertilizing their fields again with compost, going away from the chemical ag, guaranteed. But who is it with that level of buy power? And I don't know. But that's kind of what's happening here on this side. Luckily, I got 60 cubic yards of the mushroom compost. That's enough to start. But I would sure love to get a few other natural ingredients to mix in there to, make that such a more viable mixture. We got the mycorrhiza and the kelp and all that, but to throw the chicken dung and then throw the horse manure in there mixed with the straw, that's already been horses are messy eaters. You got to clean them out, to clean the stalls all the time. So to have all that as a mix, that would be the perfect soil builder. And then I could probably buy some soil builder, which is basically wood dust. Oh, and another thing, you could go to a sawmill and ask them to load your truck. And then you could make, you're going to play chemistry set out in the fields, but it's not really bad. Well, you can try some different mixes of, say, 70% compost with a soil builder, 25%, and then mix in a couple 0.5% of whatever. And you start mixing and matching until you get the right consistency that'll build your soil, provide the nutrients, and give those plants somewhere that they love to live. And hay bale gardening, there's all these new techniques and things to try this year. But getting compost to be able to go on an organic to build your own soil, you're probably going to have to move down to the Jadam method here out of Korea to start from scratch. Because what I am talking about, if you are not a registered farm, I'm sorry, it is too late now. They have crossed that Rubicon where you're a registered business farm, you present your card at purchase, or you don't get it, period. And that's the way it's already in Tennessee. So I can imagine it's far more strict in places like California, upper New England states areas. So how would people again, back to the victory garden. Okay, every family across the United States starts to grow food in their backyard. How do they start it up? The fertilizer will not be what they thought it would be. It's going to be incredibly expensive out of Home Depot or Lowe's, probably 5 to 8 more times expensive than it is now. And then how do they start to build their own soils as a garden? When they strip off the grass, it's hard clay. Year one, minute one, they just think you put a seed in it and it's going to grow. It's not like that. So A, the learning curve, but B, for the average family, just the neighborhood, how do you get those implements into the family neighborhood if there's not that kind of compost and things available that there were in generations or years past? I see the huge disconnect happening right here. I love what you're talking about. I'm putting it in practice, but an enormous amount of other people cannot, because where are they going to get the inputs from?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I've read articles and saw that because of the shortage of fertilizer, what are farmers going to do? So people are going to turn, to manure, but there's not enough manure. So then you're kind of like stepping yourself down. But for you and I, number one, again, going back to what I always preach, make sure you have a good stock of food. Next up, make sure you have seeds. Everybody should have a seed bank. Now, I buy seeds all the time. I've got a really large seed bank. So make sure you have a seed bank. And then as you go from there and you should all have a garden this year, whether it be potted plants and herbs, but some kind of garden. So how do you get the amendments? Now, I'm going to tell you something, and this is a permaculture principle, which is in a properly functioning system, and I'm not an expert by any means in permaculture. I am a newbie beginner. Same thing with regenerative ag, but every waste is used for something else. Now, a great example here where we live, there's a lawn service that comes, and they cut the grass every Wednesday. And that, of course, it gets bagged up in their mowers, and then they leave. So I started asking them I just put a bucket out, and I wanted them to give me a bucket full of grass clippings. Now, I tossed the guy a couple of jars of free spices because I like to trade, just to get them, my dad used to do that years ago when we had garbage men in New Jersey. He would give them beer and whatever, and they would always take a little extra stuff away. But these guys would start leaving the grass for me. So, and I was doing tests, like I have a lot of container plants because you're not allowed to plant into the garden where I'm at here. I mean, into the dirt.
You own your house. It's totally yours. Freedom, freest country in the world.
Yeah. There's 3 evil letters, HOA. Yeah.
Oh,
so you can
homeowners association.
Yeah, homeowners association. But I noticed in my potted plants, the ones where the seeds, they were planted at the same time, same crop, same soil, same light exposure, everything. If I put grass clippings on top of the soil, those plants did far better. Like I couldn't believe it. And it's amazing what's happening. And again, this is a regenerative ag. This is a permaculture principle. It's using a waste stream from one thing to help another operation or another process without having to pay for the input. So the grass, you put the grass on there, it does many things. Number one, it covers the soil. Soil does not want to be bare. That's why all the farmers in the Midwest that do row crops have to buy glyphosate, because in between those rows, weeds are going to come up. Nature wants to cover itself. But when you have this grass covering the soil, number one, the soil doesn't warm up as fast, so it doesn't dry out. And number two, the grass clippings will rot, and it does smell terrible. Rotted grass is nasty, but it rots and it feeds microbes into the soil, so it's like free fertilizer. And it doesn't last forever. Every week, every 2 weeks, I'll put another layer and keep piling up. It just keeps rotting down in there. But as that happens, the quality of the soil gets higher and higher. So that is really great. And it's using a free resource to help another resource or another plant growing. And that's the way we need to start thinking, like you're doing. How do we need to, you're buying some of this stuff, but we need to think about how we can create some of it from things we already have. Like if you live in an area that has deciduous trees, like Tennessee, for instance, the amount of leaves that fall down. Like, that's amazing free resources, and we need to start thinking like that. So you take those leaves, and a lot of times maybe there's somebody that doesn't want the leaves, like an older person, whatever, they don't want leaves. But if you save those leaves, those are nutrients. What about if you live in an area, again, with a lot of above ground power lines and a lot of big trees, you're constantly going to have tree services and utilities chipping up those branches because they want to keep those free. That they have so much of that stuff, they don't know what to do with it. So again, make relationships with these people. Find out how you let them know, hey, you're in my neighborhood. You can come over at any time and dump that truck of mulch or wood chips or whatever it is. So it's wood chips, it's branches, leaves, all ground up. That's the best quality stuff. This is the Eden gardening method. So again, covering the soil with things that rot back into the soil. They bring soil health. They keep the soil cool. They keep the moisture in. They make a place, a habitat for microbes and mycorrhizal fungi and worms and slugs, all kinds of things. These are the type of methods that either we're going to use now or we'll be forced to use in the future. Because I don't see, I mean, unless something miraculous happens, I don't see this system, this chemical ag system and this whole big business thing. I think it's going to get more and more difficult for it to work. So people are going to do like what you did. You move back to the land. You're figuring out how to build your soil. What's under your feet is the most important asset you have. I mean, if you take a teaspoon and dig it in the soil, in healthy soil, there's more microbes in a teaspoon of soil than people on the planet. And let people digest that and think about that. There's so much life beneath your feet. If you take care of the life beneath your feet and you use it to grow food, to raise animals, you're creating the circle of life. You're controlling everything. At the end of it, you're going to have money come in because people will want the food, they'll want the fruit, they'll want the vegetables, and you're going to continue to heal your land. That's the solution to all this. In the short term, that's why I have the website, and is to teach people how to not piss away so much money on other things. Buy these cheaper foods, stock your pantry, and then start doing the things that I just talked about and you talked about. Get some chickens. Chickens are amazing. The things that chickens can do, or ducks, they can give you so much. They give you eggs, they give you meat, they give you fertilizer, they can scratch up your ground, they control insects. Those are amazing creatures to have. And if you have some land, bigger ones, I mean, we used to milk Saanen dairy goats. They gave us amazing, pelletized manure. We got milk from them. This is what people will need to do. And you touched on it earlier, those older generations and the knowledge that those people have. This great experiment with technology and everything being automated and ordering food on your phone and all that, it's great while it lasts, but I don't see a huge long future for it. And eventually, I think we're all going back to the land, whether we want to or not. So learning about these things, learning about permaculture, learning about regenerative ag, understanding the cycles like you talk about. Again, put down the phone and start learning. This is critical to survival. That's just the way I feel.
Yeah, and I might also add the benefit of these tree companies. They have to pay to go take this stuff to dump it. A lot of times it'll go in, if they're not reusing it to make their own wood chips to sell at some sort of landscape wholesale place, they have to pay a fee to go get rid of that. So for you, and it's not cheap either. It's like $300 a load they need to pay to get rid of that. So think about that. If you're a business owner and you got somebody down the street or in a vicinity, they will drive 15 miles out of their way to go save $300 or even $600 or $900 through the day or the week by taking that little bit of extra out of the way, knowing that they could leave all that on your property. It's landfill is way, way more expensive. And people who have top fill dirt, that's actually top fill from like maybe a place that they're grading out, to take any of that sort of fill away and put it somewhere else. There's also a fee with that. So that you started getting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of fees per month of these people just trying to get rid of their grass, wood chips, and top fill. So by offering them that, they're kicking off their bottom line too, and they're very, very happy to go a little bit out of their way to bring it to you, because then they don't have that expense to run. And if they get a very reliable place where they can, put it all the time, then you might have something there, because the loads are getting a little bit thinner. I mean, right now with all the ice storms, these are the kind of branches you want right now, chipped up without the leaves. So then you can get that kind of soil builder stuff where it'll really start to break apart at the bottom of the pile, where it gets into that real almost silk thin fibers. You pull from the bottom and then it just keeps decomposing off the top there. And, we are going to have things a different way. So hopefully everybody has their own method. And Keith, I appreciate you spending your time today and, showing us and thinking about different ideas on sustainability, saving some money in the kitchen, reusing what we have. And, this is the way our grandparents thought. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're reinventing the 1930s again and bringing it to the present day. Because back then, that's what everybody did, pretty much. I mean, the cities were small in comparison to what they are today. Imagine 1920 Atlanta, Georgia, 1920 Nashville. I mean, 1920 New York, yeah, it was big, but it wasn't all that. And as soon as you left those cities, it was pretty much 100% farms, as far as everything stretched to the next quote unquote big city. But even Miami was just kicking off in 1920. It wasn't anything. It was a vacation resort for the rich that just started to grow. So any of these, giant cities that you see now, they were not what you thought they were comparatively to 100 years ago. So we're just going to take a little step back in the past, and we're going to relive it again. And bigger cities are going to empty out. You can see that breath. It's almost like a breath of civilization. Everybody came from the farms into the cities, and now it's going to be the exhale. Everybody's going to roll back to the farms again, back to nature if they can. The people who are in the cities will be tightly controlled for sure, and not really an existence I would prefer if I have a choice. And I do. So do you. Everybody does. So anyway, Keith, appreciate you coming. Any last thoughts to kick us off with here? Oh, and tell everybody where we can go again, in case you're just dropping in on the interview right now and you're like, yeah, those guys have some interesting points there.
Start putting some of these things into practice. But do check that out and do start thinking the way, David and I have been talking, and this is going to help you live a better life and build some security. But initially, you need to get your pantry stocked. You need food for security. And then once you have that, you can start working on trading and finding local resources and doing some of the things that we're talking about. But I just hope everyone will understand that this is important, take some steps, and continue paying attention to really what matters. But that's it. Anybody wants to reach me, they can reach out foodstoragefeast@protonmail.com. Happy to answer any questions. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the only reason I do it is for, myself. Is it selfish? Maybe. Because I want other people to be more prepared too, because if we're all more prepared, then my life will be better, your life will be better. So I'm looking at it sort of in a community type of setting, sharing, but also, as a self, I wouldn't say self-care, but is it too selfish to think that way? That I want other people to be prepared so I can have a better life and you can have a better life? It does boil back down to the I, doesn't it? But anyway, so that's why I do the research and information, because I think we're at that time and it's time for us to move forward. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bye for now.